It's Wednesday. You know what that means. Time for the Southern California Writers Association Hump Day Book Tour. I'm your host, Maddie Margarita, here with Diana Pardee on tech. Every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., the Southern California Writers Association welcomes a new writer to come in and talk about their books and their work. This morning, we are honored to have with us Leonard Szymczak. Leonard is the award-winning author, TEDx speaker, psychotherapist, and life coach. His books include The Roadmap Home, Your GPS to Inner Peace, an Amazon bestseller, as well as the novels Cuckoo Forevermore, which is hilarious being a psychotherapist, but we'll talk about that, and Kookaburra's Last Laugh, lighthearted satires on psychotherapy. He is the co-author, along with Mary Frank, of Fighting for Love, Turn Conflict into Intimacy. He lives in Southern California, where he writes, coaches clients, and conducts seminars. And also, we're here to talk about your latest book, but then that's a great segue into your new book, Leonard. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you, Maddie. So great to be here as well. And I'm really quite excited because I've been working on this idea for the last 3 years. And my latest book is called Bob Cratchit's Christmas Carol, The Untold Miracle of Charles Dickens' Classic. And I had this idea about, because I loved Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And I was thinking, well, you know, the clerk, Bob Cratchit, worked 20 years for Ebenezer Scrooge, the miserly character. And I was thinking, what would happen for someone who worked 20 years for this person? Would they go through a transformation? I know in the original book, Scrooge goes through his transformation from miser to Mr. Generosity, but I figured Bob had to go through his own transformational process as well. And so I thought, well, what if the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future visited him? And that's how I had the idea. And I have 3 different spirits. So I didn't have the same ones that visited Scrooge. I had just Marley, who visited Scrooge, also visit Bob Cratchit, and do the setup for 3 spirits to visit Bob Cratchit, for him to go through his character arc. So that's how I had the idea. And I'm very excited about it. Now, I showed you before, this is the kind of the cover, which I'm really quite pleased and proud of to have for the new book, which will be coming out in a couple of weeks.
Well, I'm excited for you, and it sounds like such a great premise. So when you were approaching the kind of transformation that in your mind you imagine somebody in Bob Cratchit's position would have to go through, given his family situation and everything, how did you approach doing that? And did you use your background as a psychotherapist, or did you just use your background as a father and human being?
Well, you know, I've been a psychotherapist for, well over 40 years, and I've listened to thousands of narratives, thousands of stories. And I always realized that when I got to know a client, I would understand that there, but for the grace of God, would go I, once I get to know their background. And so I know very much the character arc that clients go through in working through therapy. And I thought, well, okay, how about Bob Cratchit? He has to go through a character arc. And so I believe as writers, we're really writing about ourselves and working out our issues through our writing. You know, writing is our therapy.
You're not supposed to tell everybody that, Leonard, because then they read your book and they think they know you, and they probably do.
Well, that's true. And whenever I read someone's novel or someone's book, I know them, because all of their issues come out in their book. We just don't realize that sometimes we're not doing it consciously. But of course, if I've got issues, I'm going to be working through those issues in my book. So, I mean, I come from a very normal, dysfunctional family. So, you know, it's just.
So, well, that's interesting. So somebody reading this book, what kinds of issues do you explore in the book?
So let's take a look at Bob Cratchit. So what would it mean for a man to work 20 years for this miserly, horrible character? Well, he must have a past background where he had a father who was a horrible human being as well. And so I figured, well, I was looking at the pieces of the puzzle. So of course, Bob's father was an alcoholic, and he basically sold Bob into the warehouse where he had to work as a young boy, kind of similar to Dickens had to work in a warehouse because his father went to prison. And that became an impetus for Dickens writing his own characters. So I figured, well, Bob had to go through this transitional phase of where he became disempowered and unable to really look at his own dreams. And I figured, okay, that's going to have to be his past to move him forward to looking at his present life and then actually think about how he can actually change his past, change the beliefs he had to create a different future. So that was the whole character arc of this book.
Such an interesting story, such an interesting viewpoint, and a great book to buy for anybody for Christmas.
And you know, the other thing is I wanted to change the spirit. So so anyway, in Dickens' original, his books are very heavily male oriented. So I figured, well, what would happen if the three spirits were women? He says, whoa, okay, let's make them women. And what if they were different types of women? So the first spirit is a very vivacious woman with ebony skin. And the second woman is kind of a body busty, you know, outrageous woman. And the third woman is an Asian woman. So I figured, okay, let's have some different diversity. And these spirits, I mean, the spirit world isn't confined to just white Anglo spirits. So let's have some different interesting characters. So I wanted to make the spirits also very interesting with their own personalities.
Wow, what a great book. So how is this book different? Aside from the story, of course, the stories are different from your other novels. How did you approach writing this book differently than you did, let's say, Kookaburra's Last Laugh or Cuckoo Forever?
Yeah, my novels centered on Peter Panowski, this neurotic psychologist who works with staff who are just as crazy or crazier than the patients. So there's an old saying, Maddie, that those of us who become therapists do so because we need 40 hours of therapy a week. So,
Oh, your hour's up. Okay.
So I think my novels, I really go into the psychological makeup of the characters so that the readers really get a flavor and understanding of who this character is psychologically. And I like adding humor as well, because particularly with my the Peter Panowski novels, I use a lot of sarcasm and a lot of, I really make fun of the therapy profession about many of the crazy things that we do. And in the Christmas Carol, I do focus on Bob Cratchit's in his personality, and he has to go through this own character arc himself. He's got to change like Scrooge changed. He also has to go through a change as well. So by the end of the story, we really realize, wow, okay, he's a very different man than he was at the beginning.
So has your experience as a therapist made an impact on your writing, other than maybe some insight into I guess a massive insight into human nature and human behavior, but how has that impacted your writing, and why do you think it might be different from maybe the experience or the writing of somebody who hasn't had your background?
Well, I think probably I can think of a number of things. Number one, voice. I in dialogue, I usually have a very good, that's probably my favorite part of writing, is writing in dialogue and voice. Because I've heard so many voices in my counseling. So I lived in Australia for 14 years, so I've got a bit of that Australian background. And just listening to different ways that if I'm working with a couple, how a couple is interacting with each other, so I can take their interactions and I get their dialogue. So it really helps me a lot with dialogue. And the other thing is, obviously, my insights into the personality and the people's character. I do realize, and I've mentioned this to you before, is that I am working out my issues in my book. So and that's just kind of how we as writers do. So if I want to deal with some anger, hey, I'm going to have some anger issues with a character, and that can be a part of me that I get to play out on paper. It's really a healthy way of working out some of my own inner issues.
So out of You've written nonfiction, and you have several nonfiction books and fiction books as well.
Correct.
What is I mean, aside from the obvious difference between the two, I mean, do you approach writing those books differently, and or do you use a similar narrative voice in your nonfiction? Or
Well, I love fiction much more than nonfiction. Nonfiction, I've got to do research. It's not just telling a story, but I've got to do actually research about Fighting for Love Turned Conflict and Intimacy. It was all about couples and how to help couples. So obviously I drew upon my work with couples, but I had to do a lot of research as well in terms of couples therapy and the best approaches. But even in my nonfiction books, I use story. So there's a template. So I start off with a story, and that story leads into the content of the chapter. That's probably because stories, as we know, really are kind of the key. If we want to get a message across, we can get a message across with a story much more than telling people what they should do.
do you recommend that your patients buy your books?
Well, when I see a couple, I give them a copy of my book. So
Oh, see, that works out.
So
Yeah. How about your fiction? How about your fiction books? Do you recommend?
I tell
No, I guess that might be an ethical problem. Yeah.
You probably don't want to read my fiction books because you'll probably be running from therapy.
So speaking of that, what are you working on now?
So right now, the Bob Cratchit book is done. So as you know, in writing, there's the writing phase and the production phase and the promotion phase. So right now I'm just getting ready to launch. So it hasn't even been on Amazon yet. So I'm into launching phase of the book. And then I've just finished a fantasy novel, and it's the first of 3 novels about these fictional characters. They're mole-like creatures who live underground with these supernatural powers. And again, it's a bit kind of you have to go through the character arc as well of like any particular good fantasy novel.
Do you say that's your passion project? I know you've been working on that a while. Or
I've been working on that since 1984. So I started it because I told my children that story about the Bumplers when they were kids, young kids, and I've been working on that. And the idea and it's like sometimes ideas are like, it takes a while for that idea to kind of germinate, to sprout, and to grow. But so it took me quite some time to actually finish the first novel, 1984 to now, 2021. And then I've got 2 more novels. It's one of 3. So I'm working on the second one now.
So this is my favorite question. And in closing, I just want to ask you, when somebody reads a novel that you write, not one of your nonfiction works, but a novel, how do you hope that they feel when they finish reading the book?
Well, it's like I want them to feel like when I finish reading a good book, I want them to feel, wow, that was really worth my time reading this book. And I want them to feel a bit sad that the book is ended. Because, if I read a good book, I feel sad that the book is ended. Ooh, and I start slowing my reading towards the last chapter because I don't want to rush through it. So I want them to feel like they've been entertained, inspired, and they learned something. That's, I believe, as writers, that's what we're here. We're here to entertain, inform, and inspire other people.
Well, I think that the concept of your new book is so exciting and entertaining, and that people will love it. I hope if you can, if you buy Leonard's book, do you have any idea when that might be up on Amazon?
Yeah, my projected date, I wanted to get it up there by November 2nd. So really, it's coming up pretty soon. Definitely by at the very latest November 9th, but I'm hoping by November 2nd. Okay,
great. So we'll keep an eye out for that. And we wish you best of luck. If you can support Leonard, that would be great. He has other books. If you're interested and you read them, if you get them, somebody lends it to you, whatever, please leave a review. Reviews are important to authors. They're worth their weight in gold. So we appreciate those as well. We want to thank you for being here and for supporting us. Leonard is going to, he promised he would go back into the Facebook page, the Southern California Writers Association Facebook group, and answer questions. So please feel free to leave questions and comments in the chat. And we will also be putting this on our YouTube page, which is SCWA Writers Online, where you can go and see this interview and other interviews like this. So thank you again, Leonard, for being here. Best of luck on your books. Good to see you again.
Well, thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Diana. Of course, Southern California Writers Association is kind of like my family. Really appreciate it.
Well, what a nice way to start the week, in the middle of the week. And we will see you all next week on the SCWA Hump Day Book Tour. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.